Well, let's speak now on the programme live as well to Professor Rosa Freedman. She's a law professor at the University of Reading in the United Kingdom. Welcome to you today. I want to pick up with you a little on what our correspondent Iris Makler was just saying there, that, look, this isn't a done deal yet. The prosecutor has requested arrest warrants for those 2 Israeli leaders, those 3 Hamas leaders, but the warrants haven't been granted yet. So is it likely, in your view, that they will be granted?
Well, the starting point with this is whether or not the court has the jurisdiction to issue these arrest warrants. And the court doesn't have the jurisdiction over Israel or its nationals because the country is not party to the court, nor is the United States or Russia or about 70 other countries in the world. Palestine claims to be party to the court, and that's where there is a real sort of legal discussion, because some will say Palestine is not a state, and you can only be party to this court if you are a state. However, the court says that once Palestine issued its instruments of ratification, saying it wanted to sign up as a state, that it accepted that it could rule over what happened in Palestinian territory. So the prosecutor is making very clear that he's seeking arrest warrants for Hamas leaders for atrocities done in Palestine and in Israel, but for the Israeli leaders only in the territory of Gaza, which it claims is part of Palestine, because the court knows it doesn't have the jurisdiction for anything committed by Israelis in Israel. So that's the first complicating factor. Even if the court does have that jurisdiction, the next question is whether or not there are reasonable grounds for arrest warrants to be issued. And part of the reasonable grounds is this principle, complementarity. It essentially says that the court, the International Criminal Court, can only issue arrest warrants and act if a country is not prosecuting these crimes itself. Now, we saw with Putin in Russia that there's no effective or impartial or fair courts to prosecute any senior leadership for the war crimes being perpetrated in Ukraine. But Israel is a democracy, and it has functioning and effective and independent judiciary. So the second question will be whether or not there are court cases going through, or the ability to take those cases in Israel before it could then reach the International Criminal Court. So these are the first 2 hurdles that the judges have to address before they even get to the substance of the issue in front of them.
Huge questions indeed then before these arrest warrants can be prosecuted. But earlier on this month, it was reported that Benjamin Netanyahu was concerned about an ICC prosecution. It was reported at the time that he appealed to his ally, Joe Biden, in the United States to intervene to prevent any kind of legal action against him. At the stage we're at now, can Biden do anything?
So the reason why Netanyahu was worried about prosecution is exactly what your correspondent said earlier. If an arrest warrant is issued, then it makes Benjamin Netanyahu, as a leader of a democratic state, a pariah. It means he can't travel and he can't invite people to come visiting dignitaries to Israel in quite the same way. If an arrest warrant is issued, it will be very interesting what happens with European countries who are party to the court. Now, Belgium has already said that it will abide by anything that the court says. And Belgium has always been sort of very strong on international criminal law and universal jurisdiction. But it'll be interesting what Germany or France or the UK or other countries that have been much stronger on supporting Israel's right of self-defense and much stronger in terms of their alliance with Israel, not as strong as the United States, so somewhere in the middle ground, but they are party to the court. So there is a political element to any arrest warrant that is issued. If the judges rule to issue those arrest warrants, as your correspondent said, it doesn't really affect Hamas leaders in the same way that it affects the leaders of a democratic country. But that is not to say that the leadership of Israel, and particularly the Prime Minister, that's not to say that they don't bear responsibility for war crimes, but it's really about getting over these hurdles before we even get to the substance or where any such cases should be tried.
And if we zoom out for a minute, I'm interested in what you think of this as a legal moment. We spoke to a guest earlier who described this as a watershed because in past years, the ICC has targeted world leaders who, in his view, are not allies of Western governments, the likes of Omar al-Bashir in Sudan, Vladimir Putin, who you mentioned, obviously, from Russia. How big a shift is it now that the ICC is trying to prosecute Israeli leaders?
Let's remember that the ICC is a relatively new court when we think about international law. We're talking, it's in its third decade. It's relatively new, and it was actually created in order to deal with some very difficult cases after the terrible crimes in Yugoslavia and in Rwanda, the genocides that have been perpetrated, as well as in Cambodia. And other places where special courts, like in Iraq, were set up to deal with these most heinous of atrocities. The ICC, though, has largely gone after African leaders and has been widely criticised for doing so. It has more recently looked at Russia and the Russia-Ukraine war, but this is the first time that it will really be focusing on a democratic country. We also have to remember that this case is going on in parallel to the case brought by South Africa in the International Court of Justice. And we have to, if we're zooming out, remind ourselves that many of these cases are being brought because countries and international lawyers and experts feel very impotent about this war. They feel impotent because the UN Security Council is not acting in relation to this war, has been frozen from acting because Russia and China have refused to recognize the Hamas atrocities and the hostages, and because America has vetoed any resolution that doesn't include them. And it is that impotence that has really pushed forward states and other actors to try and use courts to pressure for a ceasefire, for an end to this humanitarian catastrophe, and for negotiated lasting peace and a two-state solution.
Professor Rosa Freedman, good to talk to you. Thanks very much.
Thank you.